Hello, everybody. This is Jimmy, and you're reading with Jimmy. Today, we're going to analyze chapters 12 to 15 of Genesis, King James Version. Ready? I hope you read those chapters with me, and now you're going to read the analysis. These are interesting chapters, aren't they? As the saga of Genesis continues. And don't forget, the word Genesis itself means the origin or mode of formation of something. Many people think that Genesis is about the formation or origin of us, humans. But this story, as people will tell you, especially Mrs., is more than that. It's about the formation of a relationship between the one God of many gods and humans. It's told by a third-person narrator who is anonymous, and therefore we have to believe what the narrator tells us, or the story will not make any sense. And I know some of you are saying, well, Jimmy, this is the Word of God. Well, not the way Jimmy treats it. Jimmy's treating it as a story, as mythology, and God is simply a character, as we're going to talk about. So hopefully you follow it with me, and I assure you it will enrich your faith. Not challenge it. And challenge it maybe, but enrich it. It requires, like all third-person narration, a close reading and putting aside what you may or may not believe. For example, on this website, To Build a Fire by Jack London is on here as a third-person narrator. And when you read that story with Jimmy, and I've got not only an interpretation, but two analysis of it, it shows you the power of the third-person narrator. And really why we have to do a very close reading of that. So you might try To Build a Fire. Anyway, I hope you've been doing just that type of reading with Jimmy to start to discover and appreciate and understand this type of story as literature, right? Let me give you an example. In the last analysis, we saw how God made a covenant with Noah. You remember that? And the covenant, the promise, the contract, was never again to destroy his creations. Remember? God saw everybody being wicked. He got, ticked off, so he's going to destroy it. But he promised Noah, I'm not going to destroy you, built an ark, etc. So we spent a lot of time defining what a covenant is. What is a covenant? It's a formal, solemn, binding agreement. And the character of God, when he makes a covenant, it's binding. Would you agree with that? I think you would. So that's the promise he made with Noah, never again to destroy that, and he gave the covenant the sign of the rainbow. This covenant we read about through our third-person narrator, and it was between God and humans, specifically Noah, because don't forget, God created, according to this story, God created man in his image. You remember that? If not, go back and read it. So that last chapter ended with the introduction of several new characters, which we're going to talk about in these chapters, and one in particular who's going to have adventures. So the one God established another covenant with this character. This character's name, Abram. This is how the last chapter ended. Terah lived 70 years and begat Abram, Nabor, and Haran. And these are the generations of Terah. Terah begat Abram, Nahor, and Haran. So Abram, those are his brothers. Haran begat Lot. Lot's going to play a role in here too. Haran died before his father Terah in the land of his nativity, etc. And Abram and Nahor took them wives. The name of Abram's wife is Sarai. Sarai. However you'd like to pronounce it. Then he gives you the name of that. So Sarai was barren. She had no child. So Terah took Abram, his son, and Lot, the son of Haran, his son's son. Follow? And Sarai, his daughter-in-law, his son, Abram's wife, and they went forth with them from Ur of the Chaldees and gone into the land of Canaan. They came unto Haran, and they dwelt there. And the days of Terah were 205 years, and then Terah died. Now, there's a lot of recording of living and dying in these chapters. Why? Because it's Genesis. This is, according to the third person narrator of this story, this is the story of human beings and their relationship with their Creator. Okay? Now, if you don't believe in God, that's okay. Because I'm telling you, even if you believe in God, suspend what you believe or don't believe and read the story with Jimmy. So Abram is the son of Terah, and he marries Sarai, and one of Terah's sons, Harai, died before his father. And you have been seeing people live and die, as I just pointed out, because the third person narrator is documenting this journey. You understand? All right. Chapter 12. Chapter 12 opens up with God, the Lord. Remember, there are many words used for God since this story started, right? But this is the Lord, it's God, the Creator, speaking directly to Abram and telling him to leave his homeland and his relatives and go to a land that the Lord will show him. So the Lord is talking to Abram. He gets the name Abraham later. We'll talk about that. It's important to remember that when God speaks, or we see God through the third person narrator speak, God may or may not be like us. All we know is that God looks like us because he created Adam in his image, but we also know that God was and is a spirit and is not flesh. Keep that in mind. So when he says God is speaking to Abram, that doesn't mean he looks like a human being. I know it's hard, but use your imagination. So God is a character in this story, and he shows up, he leaves, he comes back, right? He's the Spirit. Most of the people in the story are aware of God. You understand that? But they are also aware of other gods. There's other gods. We know that from chapter 1, right? Chapter 6 especially. So this awareness of God and gods presents itself in many ways. And you're going to say, well, Jimmy, there's only one God. Well, like I said, suspend your belief and read the story with me. According to this third person narrator, there's more than one. Now, the one who created us is the important one because he created us in this story, right? But God has sons, and we're going to talk about this. For example, Pharaoh in these chapters seems to know immediately who brought the plagues upon him. You understand? If you read this carefully with me, and we're going to talk about that. When Pharaoh approaches Abram and he says, "Why did you do this to me?" He knows exactly who brought those plagues on him. How does he know that? So when we read that the Lord talked to Abram and other characters in the story, it's, well, Jimmy, I remember when he took a walk in the garden from the cool, from the sun in the cool of day in the garden. Well, third person narrator says he's walking in the garden. So maybe he's walking in the garden. Maybe he assumed human form. I don't know, but he's walking in the garden. And we have to believe the narrator or the story will not make sense. We do know that it happens because the third person narrator tells us it happened. And ladies and gentlemen, if you don't believe the third person narrator, don't even read this story. So, did you ever hear voices? Don't answer that. Don't answer that. I don't want people coming after us if we're hearing voices. But you know what, in a dream, I dreamt about one of our advocates from business last night, a great man who was a great advocate. And he was in my dream. And I talked to him in my dream. Does that mean I'm nuts? I don't think so. We all dream. Anyway, the Lord tells Abram when he does that, gives him the lands, that he is going to build a great nation from him, bless him. Now see, when the Lord is telling him that, you have to understand that we already know his wife, Sarai, is barren. She doesn't bear children. She doesn't have any children. So now God's telling him, the Lord's telling him, I'm going to build a great nation from you, and I'm going to bless all the families of the earth through you, which puts an awesome responsibility on Abram, but also on his wife, especially since she doesn't have children. Now, we never know why Abram is chosen. We just know he is chosen by God. So it's important to note in third-person narration what characters say as reported by the third-person narrator and what they do as reported by the third-person narrator. Because the third-person narrator is omniscient and cannot lie. Now, if this were first-person narration, for example, if it was Abram telling the story, we don't know if what he's telling us would be true. So, after he receives this announcement, Abram obeys instantly. He doesn't even question it. He doesn't say, "Why are you picking me, Lord?" He doesn't say anything like that. He just accepts it. No questions asked, no doubt. Or if there is a doubt, which there is, it's later in the chapters, as you saw when we read these chapters. So when God talks to humans, there's always the choice that humans have. Listen and obey, or don't listen and disobey, or listen and disobey, or not listen and don't do anything. You got choices. We saw the results of disobeying God, didn't we? Didn't we? Do you remember Eve, Adam? Remember that? They disobeyed. They listened to what God said, don't eat from the tree, but they ate from the tree. And so, as a result of disobedience, bad things happen. So obedience is a concept that's very important in this story. As you saw, as you see, and as you will see. Obedience is one of the underlying threads. There's a lot of threads in here as we weave the story of Genesis. They all start with God's command, don't eat from the tree of knowledge. It's an underlying concept in all relationships. What is? Obedience. Think about this. Obedience in all relationships, if you're married or not married, or if you're living with someone, who knows? In all, your teacher, there's a relationship and it involves obedience. You either obey or you don't. Because we can't all be the boss. Would you agree with that? You remember Lou Holtz, who recently passed away? He was a great Notre Dame coach. He said, there's only one driver on the bus, right? The coach is the driver of the bus. And if you want to be the coach, get off the bus or find your own bus. He's an interesting fellow. So Abram travels to Canaan, where God shows up again and says, this is the land I'm giving to you and your descendants. So he builds an altar to mark the occasion. Altar building is important in Genesis, in this story. Why? Well, we don't know why just yet, but we will. I think, if I recall correctly, I think maybe even Noah built an altar. This is the way you give thanks to God. It's the way you say, thank you, God. You build an altar. Sacrifice some animals. So Abram keeps moving south. But then a famine forces him to sojourn, to stop in Egypt. Now, this is very interesting. Worried that the Egyptians will kill him and take his beautiful wife. Remember, this is very important. Abram asks Sarai to pose as his sister, not his wife. And he tells her, behold now, I know that you're a fair woman to look upon. So Sarai is fair. Therefore, it shall come to pass, pay attention, therefore, logic, it shall come to pass when the Egyptians shall see thee, that they shall say, the Egyptians shall say, this is his wife, and they will kill me, but they will save thee alive. What's that all about? Well, he's telling Sarai that when the Egyptians see you're fair, they're going to kill me, and they're going to keep you alive. Why? Well, we'll find out. So he says, say, I pray thee. Say, I pray thee. I'm begging you. I pray thee that thou art my sister. That it be well for me, for thy sake, and my soul shall live because of thee. My soul shall live because of thee. He's asking her to save him by saying she's his sister, not his wife, and his soul shall live because of thee. Throughout Genesis, ladies and gentlemen, if you haven't figured it out yet, there's a big difference between your spirit, your soul, and your flesh. You understand? Your soul lives within your flesh. Without flesh, you don't have the soul. And if you read some of the earlier chapters we did, we know what happens after you die. Some people don't die. Their soul is snatched by God, right? So what is Abram saying here? What is he really saying? Well, if the Egyptians see her and she is Abram's wife, they're going to kill him and save her. But how does he know this? How does Abram know this? The narrator doesn't say how he knows this. The question I'm asking you is, does the narrator, third-person narrator, have to tell us everything? Or can we use deduction and induction, right? Can we reason, logically, how he knows this? He's telling us that Abram said, and we have to believe him. Third-person narrator says, Abram said this to his wife, pretend you're my sister. So what is Abram's motivation to know this? It's obvious that it has something to do with her being fair. What's fair? Well, fair, good looking, right? Where the hell did that come from? Let's find out. I want you to remember Genesis chapter 6. Do you remember this passage? Right before the flood. Right before the flood. The narrator told us that this is, and it's one of the most startling sentences in the entire story, right? That the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives of all, which they chose. The offspring of these unions were, quote, mighty men, which were of old, men of renown. Think about that. Do you remember that? Sons of God. God had sons. Did you know that? This means that God had sons, and those sons saw daughters of men that were fair, and they took them as wives. And this is one way, and probably the only way, to make sense in understanding what Abram says to Sarai. Would you agree with that? Now, if you don't agree with that, Jimmy at readingwithjimmy.com, Jimmy at readingwithjimmy.com. Give me your interpretation. Because as I think about this story told to me by a third-person narrator, there's only one reason why he's asking Sarai to be his sister, to pretend to be his sister. Because A, he knows what will happen when the Egyptians see that she's fair. They're going to take her and kill him. Somehow Abram had this piece of knowledge. And we don't need the third-person narrator to point this out to us if we reason logically. So in fact, we don't need to know it at all. All we have to do is accept what the narrator's telling us. He says he's asking Sarai to lie, not to tell the Pharaoh she's his wife, but his sister. That's all you don't have to go back to chapter 6, because the facts of the case are that he's telling her, lie for me, save me, protect my soul, my soul. Now, why does he want his soul protected? Well, wait a minute. God just made a covenant with him. God told him, Abram, that he's going to have descendants that'll populate the entire earth. So if he dies, that ain't going to happen. So that's exactly what happens. Abram shows up in Egypt. The Egyptians, quote, beheld the woman, Sarai, and she was very fair. She wasn't just fair. Like if you go back here, right? Daughters that were fair. Sarai's not just fair. She's very fair. Very fair. So the princes also of Pharaoh saw her and commended her before Pharaoh. They said, look at this one. And the woman was taken into Pharaoh's house. And he could do that because, why? She's not Abram's wife, she's his sister. So the Pharaoh entreated Abram well for her sake. What does that mean? Well, he gave him sheep and oxen and asses and men servants and men. He just bestowed all sorts of gifts on Abram. Why? Because he's taken his sister. So instead of killing Abram, he rewards him. But then something weird happens. Again, this is all according to the third-person narrator. And the Lord, pay attention, plagued Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarai, Abram's wife. That's a third-person narrator statement. Think about that. The Lord put plagues on Pharaoh and his house, which means not just Pharaoh, his house, everybody around him, with great plagues. Now, we don't hear about, if you remember your Bible, Exodus is all about plagues. Remember those? Well, we're going to get to that later on when we read Exodus together. But right now, he's putting plagues on Pharaoh because of Sarai. She's also renamed later, but we'll talk about that later. The operative word is because. You understand that? In this sentence, that's the operative word. The plagues come because of his wife. Now, what did his wife do? She was fair. What the hell, right? Aha. But what's the truth? The truth is she's not Abram's sister. She's Abram's wife. And taking another guy's wife, I don't think that's allowed. Unless you kill the guy. So plagues are on Pharaoh and his house because of Sarai. And what's that all about? Well, we find out pretty quickly. The third-person narrator says, and Pharaoh called Abram and said, what is this that thou hast done unto me? Stop and think about that for a moment. Pharaoh calls Abram in and says, what the heck did you do to me? Why didn't you tell me she was your wife? You follow? Now, think about this. How does he know, first of all, how does he know this? That these plagues are coming because of Sarai, who's Abraham's wife. The narrator never said God told Pharaoh, right? That all we're doing is reading the third-person narrator. And if we just accept it for what it is, we can understand it. So somehow the Pharaoh knew. He knew that it's because he was taking Sarai as quote-unquote his sister, which was really not true, but was his wife, that these plagues came from God. Why didn't you tell me she's your wife? Why did you say she is my sister? So that I might have taken her to me to wife. But now, therefore, behold, thy wife. Take her and get out of here. Go thy way. You see what I'm saying? So how did he figure that out, that Sarai is his wife? I wonder. So Pharaoh knows exactly where the plagues come from. He asked Abram, why didn't you tell me that? And then he would have I would have taken her to my wife, but I can't do that now. So the implications are clear, aren't they? Husbands and wives are something sacred, something special, something that even the Son of God, God understands these relationships. So why did Abram lie? Well, he was afraid of being killed? Maybe. He knew what would happen? Maybe. The covenant with God? Maybe. How do you interpret it? But somehow the Pharaoh, through the plagues, figures out it was a lie. And that lie is what brought about the plagues. So he throws them all out. This is the most interesting scene. Because we can just read it and accept it. But in the third-person narrator, when that narrator is describing the characters, what they say, what they do, we can still use our understanding, right? Our reasoning. Sorry, let me retype that. Our reasoning, O-U-R, Jimmy, to understand motivations. So in any drama, like for example, Macbeth. Macbeth is a third-person narrator telling us what Macbeth and Lady Macbeth and all the others do. And it's on my website. I encourage you to read it with me. But it's really up to us not only to understand and appreciate what we're being told, but to try to figure it out. And most people read Macbeth as ambition. Oh, he's ambitious. That's why, it's No. It's obsession. Macbeth is obsessed. Obsessed. Just like Faust, which we're going to read on this website if it's not there already, is obsessed. So my interpretation, your interpretation, colors the narration. As long as we have evidence. Does that make sense? So somehow Pharaoh figured it out, that where the plagues came from. And all of this is about Sarah, the fair woman, being fair. But then remember, God made a covenant with Abraham. Remember? He just did it. So he couldn't have him killed. That doesn't mean there's like, as they say, deterministic universe. We're not saying that. We're just reading what the third person narrator tells us. So indirectly, here's some logic. Think about this. Think about this very carefully and email me, jimmy@readingwithjimmy.com, if you don't agree. Sons of God take fair women. True? Yes. Sarai is a fair woman. True? Yes. Pharaoh takes Sarai. True? Yes. Pharaoh is a son of God. True? Well, Jimmy, you're stretching it. Well, am I? Then why did Abraham tell her to say, you're my sister, not my wife? Why did Pharaoh do it? Why did Pharaoh connect the plagues to God punishing him for going after Sarah, the fair woman who was really his wife? You see what I'm saying? Underneath the third person narrator are the motivations that are driving these characters forward. And the main motivation, the thread that's throughout all these chapters in Genesis, is the relationship of a character called God, who created the creator, right, with human beings. And the third person narrator is just telling us what happened. It's up to us to figure it out. And it requires deep thought. Now, if you're not capable of deep thought, that's okay too. Enjoy the story, because there's a lot of stuff that happens there. A lot of death, right? A lot of conflict. The pattern is here. Email me if you don't agree. Ready? Isn't this wonderful? Chapter 13. Abraham and Lot returned from Egypt wealthy in life, because the Pharaoh threw them out, right? They got all this gold and livestock. But the land can't support both of their herds together, so the herdsmen start arguing. So Abraham says, okay, pick the land you want, and you go there, and I'll stay whatever you don't want, I'll take. So Lot looks out and chooses Jordan, and pitches his tent near Sodom, which will become evident and important in the next chapters. The narrator notes that the men of Sodom were exceptionally wicked. This is very important because this is where we first find out that the men of Sodom were not just wicked. Pay attention. They were exceptionally wicked. That's a beautiful adjective, modifying wicked, isn't it? Some people call it an adverb. It's modifying wicked. They were exceptionally wicked. It's really an adverb, but we'll call it modifying wicked. Exceptionally wicked. This is called foreshadowing, and you'll go back to this when we see what happens at Sodom and Gomorrah, if you don't know the story already. So after Lot leaves, the Lord affirms his covenant, and everything you see in every direction, north, south, east, west, I'm giving it to you, and your descendants will be as countless as the dust of the earth. Don't forget, dust is very important, because that's how he created us, from dust, right? Abram settles near Hebron and builds another altar. Then in chapter 14, we have a little war, a little conflict. 4 kings from the east go to war with 5 kings in the Canaan region. The 5 kings lose badly, and 2 of them fall in the slime pits. The eastern kings loot Sodom and Gomorrah. These 4 kings from the east are very powerful. They carry off goods, prisoners, including Lot. So they take Abram's nephew. A survivor brings the news to Abram, pay attention, who immediately arms 318 men. Did that strike you as something? And that came out of the clear blue when we were reading this together. Not 317, but not 300, over 300. It's an exact number. I want you to think about that. So he trains them, he stages a night raid, he routs them, and he recovers Lot and the other captives and all the goods. So 318 is interesting. It's so exact. It came out of nowhere. So I know a lot of you Googled it. Jimmy certainly did. And suddenly when you Google it, you see it carries deep symbolic significance, blah, blah, blah. And so there will be a lot of interesting interpretations, and you could follow and go down those rabbit holes if you'd like to. But don't. We're in the story, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, if you want to, you can do it. But we're in the story. Like one of the explanations is that in the original Hebrew and Greek, that they use letters to mean numbers. We want to stay in the story, so we have to take the number 318 or put it in our own interpretation. Do your own swipe. Do your own figuring out. So this is the way I thought about it, and you don't have to believe me. You shouldn't believe me. You should put your own interpretation on it. If you want to go back and study the original Hebrew and how they would substitute letters for numbers and numbers for letters, be my guest. But I looked at it as a simple 3:18, chapter 3, verse 18 in the previous chapter. I don't know if that's true. That's a stretch. Here's the passage. Thorns and thistles shall be for me. This is when God's talking to Adam after he ate from the apple, and he's saying, thorns and thistles shall it bring forth for you. You're going to suffer because you ate that apple. And you're going to eat the herb of the field. So, this is the whole passage. I'm not going to read it to you. I put it in context, and you can read it for yourself. So, the Lord told Abram, Abram's descendants will be as countless as dust. Do you remember that? We just talked about this. So the ground and dust. The ground and the dust it's one of those threads that weaves around this story. Just keep it in mind. So that 318 is not just 318. It could be 318. It doesn't matter. It's 318. The best way to look at it is simply it's the third person narrator saying there's 318 men. There was one interpretation I read where saying, no, there was only one guy. Some scholar thought about this and said, no, there's no 318. There's only one guy. Good luck with that. By the way, if you believe that, email me, jimmy@readingwithjimmy.com. I've got a bridge to sell you. Besides, the scholars there's 318. In fact, ladies and gentlemen, it's not written as a number. It's written as words. It's not written as a number. It's written as words. The same way you write it on a check. If you still use checks, you write it both as a number and as a word. 318. You understand? Do you understand? Okay. So, and there are many servants born in his own house. You can see the wealth of Abram because he's training these 318 men from his own house. And he's also a warrior. And on his return, 2 kings come out to meet him. This is very interesting. I hope you paid attention. The king of Sodom offers Abram all of the recovered goods. Please take everything back. Just give me back the people. Take all the stuff. I want the people. But before that exchange, Melchizedek, the king of Salem and a priest of the Most High God, brings out bread and wine. And what does he do? He blesses Abram. Melchizedek. The narrator says he was the priest of the Most High God. Most High God. That would be the Lord who is talking to Abraham, wouldn't it? Wouldn't that be the same guy? Same character? Yes. So the actual blessing is interesting. Quote, blessed be Abram of the Most High God, possessor of heaven and earth. Who's the possessor of heaven and earth? Not Abram. God. Look at the sentence structure. God is the possessor. And he's not just a God. He's not just a high God. He's the Most High God. The one. You understand? And blessed be the Most High God, which hath delivered thine enemies into thy hand. In other words, the Most High God, what did he do? He delivered Abram's enemies into his hand. Wait. Isn't that what happened? He rounded up those 318 people and boom, defeated the enemies. Melchizedek is the priest of the Most High God. He recognized Abram as of the Most High God. And note how many times those words are used, Most High God. 3 times, and once again later when Abraham speaks, who says, quote, and Abram said to the king of Sodom, I have lifted up my hand unto the Lord, the Most High God, the possessor of heaven and earth. Do you see how everything is just coming together? Well, Jimmy, I just don't believe this. There's a bunch of stuff. Whatever you want. I don't really care. I'm tracing this evidence in this story told by a third-person narrator. And I'm just telling you, if you're going to understand this story and understand God as a character, not as some supreme being, but as the character in this story, he's referred to repeatedly. This is the one. There's many gods in here, but this is the Most High God. So you remember early in the story, I pointed this out that there's more than one God. The third-person narrator is telling us that this God, the God of Abram, is the Most High, the one. You see the threads coming together? So Abraham gives the king of Sodom a tenth of everything. He gives him a tenth of, here, take a tenth of everything, right? Abraham gives the king, but then Abram refuses the king of Sodom's offer of all that stuff completely. He says, I don't want your stuff. He doesn't want anybody to give him anything. He wants his wealth to come from the Most High God. Chapter 15 is in fact about the covenant. So this is, God doesn't, he comes to him in a vision. There's a vision. And notice the different then and before, right? This is different than before. This is not God showing up as a spirit, as a whatever. It's in a vision. God, remember in chapter 1, God was walking in the garden when he confronted Adam and Eve and saying, where are you, Adam? And he said, well, we're hiding because we're naked. Who told you? Remember that? He was walking in the garden in the cool of day. But if you can keep God as a spirit in mind, ladies and gentlemen, this whole story makes sense. He's God. He's not like humans. He created us in his image, but he's God. He's a different type of character. Don't forget, he created everything. He destroyed everything. When people turn wicked, this is a story about our relationship with this character called God. So in this vision, he tells Abram, fear not, Abram, I am thy shield and thy exceeding great reward. I am. In other words, God is Abram's protector, which he's already demonstrated, right? Protected him from being killed. Abram speaks back to the vision, but he doesn't understand because he is childish. How are you going to do this? How are you going to give me all these descendants? My wife is barren. How is this possible? How is this going to happen? And behold, the word of the Lord came unto him, saying, This shall not be thy heir, but he that shall come out of thy own bowels shall be thy heir. Remember his servant? He was talking about his servant. No. This is going to come from your bowels, from you. And he brought it forth abroad and said, Look, not toward heaven. Now, look at heaven. Come here. Look at heaven. Brought him forth from the tent. Look at heaven. Look at the stars. Can you number them? He says, if you're able to number them, that's going to be how many, that's your seed. Your seed, you're going to populate the earth. So that's what he means. He's coming outside the next line says, Abram believed in the Lord, and he counted it to him for righteousness. What does that mean? He counted it to him for righteousness. God reaffirms who he is. Abraham, he hesitates. Lord God, whereby shall I know that I inherit all this stuff? So God gives him an order to gather specific animals. 3 years old, we'll talk about this later, a heifer, a goat, a ram, a turtle dove, a pigeon, cut them in half and lay the halves opposite each other. And Abraham does it, but then he keeps the birds of prey from descending and eating the carcasses. This 3-year-old requirement is a foreshadowing of what happens later in another book of the Bible, the demand for the best animals. But we don't want to talk about that. He's just saying they have to be 3 years old. That's all you need to know, just what the third-person narrator is telling us. Cuts them in half, puts them down, spreads them out, and he keeps the birds of prey from getting them. So as the sun sets, Abram falls into a deep sleep, and lo, a horror of great darkness fell upon him. Now this is interesting. The great darkness is a horror, isn't it? But in that horror, in that darkness, the Lord talks to Abram and tells him what's going to happen. He says, quote, the seed shall be a stranger in the land. Your children, your seed will be a stranger in the land, not theirs, and they shall serve them, whoever them is, and they shall afflict them 400 years, whoever they are. And also that nation whom they shall serve will I judge. I'm going to judge them too. And afterward shall they come out with great substance. And thou shalt go to thy fathers in peace. And thou shalt be buried in a good old age. This is foreshadowing of the book of Exodus, the next book in the Bible, right? Finally comes the covenant with Abraham. This is the deal. Pay attention. Unto thy seed I have given this land, from the river of Egypt unto the great river, the river Euphrates, the Canaanites, the Gezanites, the Hittites, etc. All of this, I'm giving it to you. And then the chapter ends. So, Jimmy thinks that these chapters are the relationship of Abram's covenant with God. God's making a deal with Abram just like he did with Noah, just like he did with Adam, except Adam broke the deal with Eve, right? They ate that apple. So faith, obedience, promise are the through lines. You understand? And there's tension, conflict between what God promises and the apparent impossibility that drives everything forward. It's almost when God makes these deals, it's like, how the hell is that possible? How is that possible? Very important point when you're dealing in this book as literature, not as reality, but as literature. So when this character called God says something, for example, when he told Noah, build an ark, I'm going to flood, I'm going to kill everybody. What? Who? Really? Who would believe that? But he does. It comes true. So the narrator sets up two coalitions in this conflict. The kings of fighting, right? That's important, these kings. Why? Because there's a lot of kingdoms, and there's Abram in the middle of all of these kings. He's not a king, right? He's just a guy. And before the main battle, he traces in great detail the defeat of the people. Remember that passage? He's very specific about the way this thing happened. And then the battle, they join battle, and the next thing we know, the 5 kings are running away. There's no description of the fighting. 2 kings fall in the slime pits, and the rest go to the mountain. The third-person narrator is not interested in the specifics of the battle. The interest is in the consequences, that Lot is taken. So Abraham has to resolve the situation. Remember, I will deliver, Melchizedek, right? They're going to deliver your enemies into your hand. And that's exactly what happens. So Abraham, the narrative is precise, tactical, blah, 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 blah. He chases the enemy, he recovers everything. So what is this chapter doing? Well, it's establishing Abram's character. Because remember, he's not a king, he's a nobody, right? Which is a strange movie, Nobody. I got a Nobody too now. And stature in the world of kings and warfare. It's just, he's just a guy, right? With a tribe. He's a tribe. He's got people. He's not a passive, he's a man of action, loyalty, military. He's a guy. He's a warrior. He's brave. He's also deceptive. What does Sun Tzu say about war? Deception is important. Sarah, don't tell him you're my wife. Tell him you're my... See, that's deception. He's just. He refuses enrichment. He honors the priest king who blesses him. And he's deceitful. So the real drama is really deciding who he is. He doubts himself a little bit. How are you going to do this? How are you going to do this? Gee whiz. What I'm trying to identify here is that the third person moves through the world where the boundary between divine and human is blurry. Ladies and gentlemen, all stories have a thread, right? And sometimes the thread is blurry. Your own life is blurry. You can't really trace sometimes why things happen. You know this. But there is always a root cause, right? The gods take fair women. Kings behave like gods. The Most High God. This is what makes classical literature, stories like this, so very rich. We see how others lead their lives and how to lead our own. Do you practice deception? Is being deceitful immoral? Well, it depends. It depends, Jimmy. Really? On what? So in this particular story, for example, in Beowulf, which is on my website, there are threads of the existence of beings other than ourselves. Grendel was a great monster in Beowulf. Well, Jimmy, there's no monsters. You don't have to believe in monsters. So you really think there are no monsters? Have you looked around the world lately? Have you looked around the world? So we see the threads of existence in ourselves. There's something more powerful. There's a spirit, a force, something. I don't know what it is, but I'm enjoying this story because this story is painting a picture, right? So Abram navigates all this. He's trying to navigate this, like we all are. We're all trying to navigate through life. Oh, we did this, da. He receives blessings. He extracts his wife from Pharaoh's house through divine intervention. He refuses the king of Sodom's offer. Well, I don't want your money. So Abram is moving through a world just as we do. It's populated by all sorts of characters, challenges, right? Isn't it? The truth is, these covenants are with all of us. I never made a deal with God. No, I'm not saying you did. I'm saying in this story, God makes deals with humans. And it affects all humans. Why? because he's the Most High God. Well, I don't believe that, Jimmy. You don't have to. I don't want you to if you don't. I'm not trying to convert you. I'm trying to help you understand this story as literature. And in this story, this character, the Most High God, makes deals with people that have consequences. Oh, wait, really, Jimmy? Yes, really. Deals have consequences. Have you taken New Year's Eve? Have you sworn at New Year's Eve a resolution? Did you keep it? I rest my case. I rest my case. I rest my case. But don't let me get ahead of myself. We want this story to unfold and appreciate it, right? Don't we? All right. Thank you for coming by. You've been reading with Jimmy. Let me get to the end here. Okay. Learn more about the Bible by continuing to watch more of our ongoing videos. This is a great story. Can you tell I'm enjoying myself? I enjoy myself no matter what I read with you. You've been reading Genesis. This is the analysis of chapters 12 to 15. Be sure to read the other classics on my website, including what I named. To Build a Fire, Macbeth, all sorts of stuff. Faust will be here shortly. And be sure to visit and read other classics, right? Remember, we're reading Genesis as literature, not as the Word of God, because our intention is not to harm your beliefs, but to help them stay strong. My email is jimmy@readingwithjimmy.com, or you can make a comment right here. Thanks for coming by, and good luck. Have you made a covenant today? Have a good day. Bye.